The first stop the Israelites made on their journey from Egypt to the land of Canaan was their crossing of the Red Sea. At this point, the Pharaoh had cornered the Israelites along the bank of the Red Sea. Moses then, through the power of God, parted the Red Sea and allowed for the Israelites to cross. On Exodus chapter 14, verses 13 through 16, quote, Moses answered the people, Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Then the Lord said to Moses, Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. This shows the Lord's power and his willingness to help the Israelites. The next stop on the journey is the tabernacle. This was the sanctuary that the Israelites created under God's orders to house God's presence. It was a very elaborate design, and God gave Moses many, many precise instructions on how to build the tabernacle exactly as God wanted it. On Exodus chapter 25, verses 8 through 9, quote, Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. The building of the tabernacle was a way that the Israelites grew closer to God along this journey. In building this exactly as God asked, they now had God's presence in their camp during their daily life. The next stop is manna, and manna was the bread or the food that God supplied the Israelites along their journey. Many of them were starving and cried out to God for some relief. So God sent down from the heavens this substance called manna, which was on Exodus chapter 16, verses 31 through 32. It is described like this. Now the house of Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Moses said, This is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. This way that the Lord supplied Israel with this manna shows his willingness to their journey and their reaching of the promised land. Without this food, the Israelites would have certainly perished in the wilderness. The next stop is Mount Sinai. This is the mountain which the Israelites camped under and which God's presence was first brought among them. Moses went to the top of the mountain to talk with God and to renew the covenant. And God's presence was like a storm cloud on top of the mountain. On Exodus chapter 19, verses 9 through 11, quote, The Lord said to Moses, I am going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you. Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said, and the Lord said to Moses, Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all of the people. This is very important because this is the first time the Lord's presence is specifically in the same area as the rest of the Israelites. This shows how the Lord is truly with them on this journey and willing to help them. The next stop is the incident of the golden calf. This incident occurred while Moses was on top of Mount Sinai talking with God. And it occurred when the Israelites believed that Moses had been gone so long that they thought he was never coming back. So they built an idol in the shape of a golden calf in which they worshipped. On Exodus chapter 32, verse 1 through 6, quote, "When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, 'Come make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him.' Aaron answered them, 'Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me.' So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, 'Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord.' So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. This is important because it shows how the Israelites were not perfect in their worship of God. As Moses was renewing the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, the Israelites below were already breaking them in worshiping a false idol. The next stop is the two tablets, and these were what the Ten Commandments were inscribed on and what Moses brought back from Mount Sinai. On Exodus chapter 32, verses 15 through 16, quote, "Moses turned and went down the mountain with the two tablets of the covenant law in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablet. These tablets were very, very important, as it was the laws the Israelites would have to follow. These were written by God himself. This was the work of God, and these were what the Israelites would have to follow very explicitly to be in good favor with God. The next stop is the rock from the water. This occurred deep into the journey when the Israelites were once again complaining about their lack of water. Moses asked God for help, and God told him that God would work his magic and bring water from a rock. And Numbers chapter 20, verse 5 through 12, quote, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting and fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, "Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out of its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community, so they and their livestock can drink." So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sign of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." This is very, very important because it shows even Moses, the closest with God out of all the Israelites, could sin and was not perfect. He did not directly obey God's orders and thus was exiled from entering the promised land. And the last stop on the journey is Moses' death. This occurred after his long speech. He died on top of Mount Nebo in Moab, over the Jordan River, overlooking the promised land that he led his people to, but would not be able to enter. On Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 1 through 5, quote, "Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Then the Lord said to him, 'This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it.' And Moses, a servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. This is very much the conclusion of the story of the Israelites' journey. Here is Moses, the one who led them this whole way, dying just as his people are about to enter the promised land he will never enter. He knows he succeeded, and his people will soon thrive as the